Meanwhile, there is a backlash that is building against the Me Too movement. Backlash has really begun based on the Me Too movement now making clear that there is no standard for even such basic things as consent. Now, I talked about this a few weeks ago on the show, and I got a little bit of flack for it. I said that one of the problems with left-wing social ideology is that they proclaim that consent is the only value when it comes to sex, but then they refuse to abide by those rules when the chips are on the table. What I meant by that is that the left doesn't actually believe that yes means yes and no means no. Right? The left wants to say that consent is the only thing that matters. Listen, I believe consent is deeply, deeply, deeply important. But the idea that consent is a clear yes or no line, and there's no malleability to it at all, that is just not practical in terms of human sexual relationships. No does mean no, but yes doesn't always mean yes. And what's interesting is that the left is beginning to recognize this, but they don't know how to deal with this. And they also don't know how to set a standard for what should end a career and what should not. Matt Damon is being raked over the coals today because he had the temerity to suggest that sexual harassment is not the same as sexual assault, that saying something mean to a woman is not the same as Harvey Weinstein raping them. And the left is just going after him hammer and tongs. Well, how dare he? They're all bad. Yes, they're all bad, but a pickpocket doesn't get punished the same way as a mass murderer. Right? That's just, that's silly. And that's not making light of pickpockets. Right? Somebody who is a car thief doesn't get treated the same as a serial killer. And they're both bad, but the left refuses to acknowledge these distinctions. What's funny is even the left is beginning to realize this now. Of course, in order for the left to realize this, their ox has to be gored. A lot of what the left is doing now is largely because Al Franken is on his way out of the Senate, and they're sad about that. They feel like they wish they hadn't gotten rid of him. Mika Brzezinski finally sounding off on Me Too, and she says, guys, we may have gone a little too far here where any accusation by anyone at any time can ruin a man's career. Yeah, we've been saying this for a while here, Mika.
I think the process itself is what we need to be talking about before we talk about the men, because the process needs to be, it's going to be complicated, but I think women feel that they are maligned and mistreated through the process, and therefore they're afraid to step forward. So we need to look at the process. But right now, any woman can say anything, and a man's career is ruined. Now, a lot of women can say things that are true, and their career should be ruined.
By the way,
but the problem is
by the way, hold on.
That any woman can say anything, and that's it. It's over. Is that how we're running businesses now?
Okay, so she's exactly right. Matt Damon is being raked over the coals for basically saying the same thing Mika Brzezinski did. He did an interview with Business Insider, and here's what he said, quote, "We're in this watershed moment, and it's great, but I think one thing that's not being talked about is there are a whole bleep load of guys, the preponderance of men I've worked with, who don't do this kind of thing and whose lives aren't going to be affected." When he was asked if he'd ever worked with someone who's been accused of sexual misconduct, he said it would have to be on a case-by-case basis. He said, that always went into my thinking. I mean, I wouldn't want to work with somebody who life's too short for that, but the question of if somebody had allegations against them, it would be a case-by-case basis. You go, what's the story here? And then he also said there's a difference between, patting someone on the butt and rape or child molestation, right? Well, there is. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to folks, but there is. They both ought to be punished, but the punishment ought not be the same. It says both of these behaviors need to be confronted and eradicated without question, but they shouldn't be conflated, right? Tell me what he's saying wrong here. I mean, I'm not a Matt Damon defender. I think Matt Damon is not exactly the brightest egg in the basket, but what? Like Rose McGowan said, Matt Damon is dense. Zerlina Maxwell says, Matt Damon equals every white man who is used to people taking his opinion seriously, even if he has no idea what the F he's talking about. I mean, this is just... like, really? I love this. Cher says, Matt Damon is the epitome of a faux ally whose performative wokeness is more about servicing his own ego than the needs of the oppressed and disenfranchised. Like, we have gone... okay, this is insane. Matt Damon didn't say anything wrong there. I mean, again, I'm defending Matt Damon here. Matt Damon didn't do anything wrong here. And then meanwhile, there is no standard for behavior. So here is the evidence there's no standard for behavior. So over the weekend, there's a woman named Jessica Bennett. Jessica Bennett is the gender editor of the New York Times. Yes, that's a real thing. There's a gender editor, which is weird. I don't know how you would edit a gender. But in any case, she wrote a piece titled, When Saying Yes is Easier Than Saying No. She argued that in many cases, women say yes to sex, but they don't actually want to say yes to sex. Right? She says, quote, sometimes yes means no, simply because it is easier to go through with it than explain our way out of the situation. Sometimes no means yes, because you actually do want to do it, but you're supposed to, you're not supposed to, lest you be labeled a slut. And if you're a man, that no often means just try harder, because persuasion is part of the game. Bennett continued, and she argued that consent is actually societally defined, that our idea of what we want, of our own desire, is linked to what we think we're supposed to want. This is what Bennett writes. But Bennett offers no clear solution on this, right? So now she's saying that sometimes yes doesn't actually mean yes, sometimes yes means no, and sometimes no means yes, meaning a woman doesn't want to have sex, or she does want to have sex, but she wants to be persuaded into it. She's playing hard to get. Okay, this has happened, I'm sure, to thousands of people over the years, millions of people, where a woman says no, and then a guy says, please, and the girl says, okay, sounds great, right? Like this, the idea that no means no permanently, obviously, is not true. The idea that no means no from minute to minute is not always true. You have to take no as a no, guys. But this is when you don't have any societal standards, when sex has been completely delinked from meaning. It's difficult to redraw these lines. And this is one of the problems, is that in the Me Too moment, we're trying to draw lines in an area where all lines have been obliterated. Right? Bennett doesn't offer any clear solutions. If it's true that women say yes but mean no, are men supposed to read minds? If a woman says no but a man seduces her until she says yes, is the initial no more important than the final yes? Now, Bennett doesn't offer any guidance here, but she's not the only one saying this. There's a woman named Rebecca Reed for the Metro who said she once participated in a threesome because she didn't want to be rude. She was over at dinner with a guy and his wife, and they said, come upstairs. And she was like, well, you know, I had dinner. I guess I don't want to ruin the dinner. I go, really? How are they supposed to know that you're not into it? I mean, like, I've been at a lot of weird dinner parties, but I would never just say yes to having sex with people out of a desire not to be rude. Why? Well, Reed says such experiences aren't uncommon. Quote, there are hundreds of reasons why, but they all boil down to the same thing. We're nice girls. We've been raised to be nice. It's so funny how this definition has changed, right? 50 years ago, if you said a girl was a nice girl, that meant she didn't put out, right? I mean, this is what it meant. If you go back to 1955 and you said that a girl was a nice girl, what this meant, this was a euphemism for she wants to remain a virgin until she is married. Now a nice girl means that you're supposed to say yes to any sexual proposition because otherwise you're being mean. She says, quote, sometimes being careful means having sex you don't want that leaves you feeling dirty and sad and a bit icky. It's not rape, it's not abuse, but it's not nice either. But now we're going to conflate rape, abuse, and not niceness, apparently. In the pages of The New Yorker, there's this short story that went viral. Okay, it's called Cat Person. The author of this piece it has now gotten apparently $1 million advance because the piece went so viral. What exactly is the piece? Well, it's about a woman named Margot who seduces a man. She sends him all the signals that she wants to have sex with him, but she's internally divided over whether to go through with it. Quote, she knew that her last chance of enjoying this encounter had disappeared, but that she would carry through with it until it was over. In the end, she has sex with the guy, right? She goes ahead with it, even though she's sort of repulsed by it. And it's not really rape because she says yes the whole way, but then she doesn't like it. And then she breaks up with the guy, like she never contacts him again. And he's texting with her, and then he says that she's a whore. And the whole idea of the short story is she's not really a whore because she didn't really want to go through with it, but she went through with it to be nice, and now he's being mean because he's calling her a whore. And there is this sort of vagary in sexual relationships, and this is painful stuff, I'm sure, for a lot of women, but it does raise a pretty serious question. What about the guys? What are men supposed to do? Because it's men who are on the line here, right? If these women have a bad sexual experience, that is quite terrible. It's quite awful. I feel terrible for them. But if the suggestion is that you had a bad sexual experience and now you get to ruin a guy's career over it or ruin his life over it, there I'm not so cool, right? We are in the midst of a crusade not to make women feel better about sex, but to punish male aggressors, right? There is a distinction. This is not about making women feel better about sex. The Me Too movement was not supposed to be about just all sexual experiences for women are supposed to be glorious and wonderful, because not all sexual experiences are going to be glorious and wonderful. I'm married for 10 years. Not all sexual experiences, even within marriage, are the same, right? Sometimes better than others. The idea that as a society, we are now targeting bad men, we have to differentiate between the two goals. One is assure that sex for women is better. The other is assure that men are not aggressors. The second one seems to me easier than the first, but we're conflating the two. If we water consent down to nothingness, if yes sometimes means no, and no sometimes means yes, and men are supposed to read minds, and if they don't read minds properly, we ruin their careers, then how can we ever expect there to be any sort of comfortable sex at all? Because men are not going to engage if they're bright, right? And women are then going to claim that men are denying them, I suppose. What we have here is a problem of expectations, okay? All three of these articles that talk about yes not meaning yes and no not meaning no all the time, they're articulating a complaint that women want to fulfill men's expectations. Basically, they're blaming men for their own confusion over sex, right? Men expect them to have sex. They don't want to disappoint the men, so they have sex with them. Men want them to have sex. They may or may not want to have sex. They start it, and then they feel like it's too much of a bother not to move away from sex. But there's another expectation that's been created here that's not about men at all. Okay, there's two expectations. One is that men want to have sex with you all the time. That's not an expectation. That's a reality, okay? Men want to have sex with women all the time, at least straight men. But there's a second expectation that women are fulfilling, and this is the one that's actually destroying a lot of the rules. Okay, that is the expectation that women themselves are supposed to treat sex casually, or they are reinforcing the patriarchy. This is the feminist argument, that if a woman is an old-fashioned nice girl, that if a woman says, I don't want to have sex until I'm married, because I find that to be a perversion of nature and a movement away from what God intended for us. This makes her a prude. It makes her backwards. Watch any Hollywood movie made for the last 30 years. The good girl is really the stupid girl. The good girl is the dimwit who's going to have to loosen up a little bit, right? In Footloose, the good girl is really, she wants to be a bad girl, but she's repressed by John Lithgow, right? This is the society Hollywood has created for us. The society the feminist movement has created for us. There are two expectations. Men always had the expectation or the hope, not the expectation. Let's put it this way. Men always had the hope that women would randomly have sex with them. Now men have the expectation that women will randomly have sex with them. What changed? It wasn't men. It wasn't men. What changed here? What changed here was that the feminist movement said to women that you have a responsibility to treat sex casually, otherwise you are falling in line with the patriarchal system. Our consent-only society, in which sexual activity has become a throwaway, and any notion of cherishing it is scoffed as patriarchal, that we laugh at that as patriarchal, men have developed expectations, women are moving to meet those expectations. It's not good for men, it's not good for women, it's not good for anyone. Right? Consent only matters in a system where people are capable of saying no. And what I'm saying is that society is basically telling women on all sides to say yes, and then they're telling men that it's okay if women say yes unless women actually meant no.